G'day everybody. Mandalorian lamp stand, inspired by that iconic scene where the Stormtrooper helmet goes on top of the lamp. I got given a paint your own Stormtrooper helmet by my family, and I'm halfway through painting that. It's been a long time project, and in the process of making moulds for the other Stormtrooper helmets for the things that I did, I also made one for it, and I decided that it was about time that I poured a mould and made a lamp, and then I decided if I was going to make one, I may as well make two. So this is just the two-part resin that I use. It's called Craft Cast, available from Aldax in Australia if you're in Australia. It is a two-part resin, equal parts A and B, and I really like it. You can demold it after an hour. It's gone off fairly much in an hour, and you get about 15 minutes working time with it, so it's pretty good for pouring into fine holes and things if you're doing. Produces a fairly detailed cast. I use the white one, but you can colour it up with tinters, so you can actually make. I've made grey and black at times, but I like the white one, especially since it was a Stormtrooper helmet, and that meant that I wasn't going to have to worry so much then for painting it. So the mould when I made it was a disaster. The helmet popped up because it was buoyant. It popped up in the silicon in the middle of the mould making process, and that was a bit of a disaster, and I had to push it down with a masking tape, which has become part of the mould now. You can see the cardboard ring in the middle of it. The reproduction of the helmet was really good. The details it captured the details well, but it was, apart from the disaster of the floating helmet, I expected it to. The Craft Seal silicon rubber that I use is also a really good rubber that takes the impressions really well, and makes quite a few moulds. After I'd molded and decanted both of the helmets, I sanded them off, and then I went through the process of dremeling in the damage to the helmet based on the pictures from episode 5 of season 1 of The Mandalorian, and did the same for both of them. I didn't want to make them massively individual in terms of the damage that was on. There's a picture that I really like. I think it's the iconic one, so I did them both the same. Because of the way that when I sanded it back, there is an issue with the mould at the top where the blue tack had been holding the helmet down. It leaves a hole, as you can see in the one on the left. So after I'd cut the bases out and tidied them up, ready to receive the light fitting and the pole that's going to go up inside of them, I decided also, because the mould itself, it's about 250 mils of resin to make the whole helmet, and that gives you a shell that's about, I don't know, 3 or 4 millimeters thick, and it's got to hold the pole and the light and everything. So what I decided to do was plug them up with a bit of masking tape where there was a perforation in the actual shell, and then refill them with that same resin to about 30 millimeters, about an inch and a half thick. Then I made a pilot hole in the top of the helmet. I decided what angle that I wanted it on to suit the picture, and then I drilled a small hole in the top that went through to give me the angle, and then I used a borer bit on the drill to drill out on the same angle a hole big enough to accept the pole. So it fits quite snugly. The helmet is on the angle that I want it to be on to match the pictures, and so then I dry fitted the pole and the light. These are just LED camping lights, so they come with a switch on them. They fit into a USB socket, so that I just went and bought an extra USB power point to plug it into the 240 volts that we use in Australia, but they're just LED lights. Wasn't sure how big to make them, didn't want them, I wanted to try and keep them a little bit proportional to the helmet, but I did want them to still function as lamps. So these ones would work really well on a bedside table, which is what I've done, or a coffee table, or just beside your armchair if you wanted it as a reading lamp. Made the bases out of 12mm chipboard. This is just particle board that I had left over from a different job, and drilled a hole through the center, bored it out with the same thing to accept the pole, drilled a hole through the bottom, and cut a groove in to accept the power cord and disguise a little bit when they're sitting on the ground. Then I sanded them nice and neatly around the edges and rounded off the top. The next thing was getting the poles that were going to make the spikes in the helmet and putting them through. To make the fabric on the front, you can see it's just like a chucksy, wipey, one of those wiping cloth things that you just use for dishwashing and general purpose. This is a postal cylinder. I wrapped it in Glad wrap, covered them in PVA glue, really soaked them in PVA glue, and moulded them around the cylinder in order to get the shape. Put all of the folds in and left it there to dry. Then while that was still drying off, it was starting to head towards winter here, and so it took a couple of days actually for the fabric to get stiff enough for me to be able to paint it and not ruin it again. So I grabbed the spikes that I'd sanded and then dremeled the damage, some more tooling damage in the top of them. Did some puttying up of the scrapes that were left over from the dodginess of the mould. It's time to paint the fabric. So it was dry now and fairly stiff, so I just got some paint that was colour similar enough to the way that the rag looks in the photo, and painted the inside and the outside of it. Because the paint is water based, it tended to react with the PVA a little bit, so I kept them in shape when I painted them by putting them inside of a cylinder that I cut in half so that I could keep the shape of them. They didn't flatten out. I did a bunch of coats on this and made it so that it was fairly opaque and stiff. The next task was to get the Stormtrooper helmets and do the details in them. Thankfully, I did give them a spray with a overall white in a satin finish because it makes them easier to clean, and then it was just going through painting with a black over the top of them. So the Stormtrooper helmets have only black and grey. So I did both helmets bits at a time, painting the lines and the things in. I really like the way that when you paint them, the helmet comes up. It's a fairly easy thing to paint and to get it looking good, as long as you can just fill in the gaps and not put your fingers. The hardest part of painting a helmet, I think, is not sticking your fingers in the holes after you've painted it when you're wiggling it around in your hand to get a different angle. But I'm really happy with the way that the helmets came up in terms of the way they looked. Then it was stick them on just put them on a bit of leftover rod and glue that spike in so that it maintained the shape of the angle, so that it looks like it's a continuous thing when it comes through. I then glued the fabric bit to the front of the helmet so that now it's hanging down and it actually performs part of the lampshade. Now I painted the inside of these helmets black to try and make them a bit more opaque, but in the end I stuck foil on the inside of the helmet and I lined them with foil, and that one, it went in and made the shape best, and two, it made it more light proof. I glued I glued the lamp rod in with liquid nails into the base, put some sand on it and thought I was finished, and that was quite hubris of me. It didn't have enough purchase with just the little bit of the half an inch or so, quarter of an inch that it was drilled into the base, and so I had to disassemble it and put some little locking things on it, some brackets, screwed them to both the base and the lamp rod, and then I made a block of wood for both of them, drilled it out and glued it so that it was far more substantial and there was no wobbly bits. Made another Stormtrooper helmet in the mould and painted it up, and then cut it in half to make the helmet at the bottom of the thing. And as what you're seeing now is me cutting all my foam bits around to make it look like a built up sandy base, and to get rid of the fact that I had to put a block of wood to hold it at the bottom. The I glued the helmet down and glued the base down, but then I also put some acrylic gap filler, just the kind used for filling gaps, to fill in the gaps around the base and around the helmet and make it smoother and make the helmet look more like it was buried in a sandy, at the bottom of the pole in a sand sort of a thing, rather than just stuck on there all higgledy-piggledy. Did that for both of them. That's become the only difference between the two lamps, is that one of them, the helmet's facing one way and one of it's facing the other, because I only used one helmet. Then I painted the base and felt like I was miles behind, because I had thought I was finished when I first glued them in, and so I painted around the base with just a creamy sandy sort of a colour to hide the whiteness of the filler and stuff. While that was drying, I used a black wash, homemade black wash. I got the recipe for mine from Geek Gaming Scenics, make your own wash, so if you want to check out his YouTube channel you can get the instructions on how to do it. I've used this wash a number of times and it's still going. I did some on the fabric as well, just to make it give it a bit of variation, and I did it on the helmets at the bottom of the pole too. After that it was then gluing the sand on. So that's a fairly standard thing, just put the PVA glue on the base and then sprinkle the sand on it. This is a few glamour shots that I took in the process after I'd done the weathering. I think when you do the weathering the helmets come up really well, and like I said, I really like painting the Stormtrooper helmet. It's a fairly easy, it can be tedious doing all the little lines, but it always comes up good and it's a fairly easy thing to do. So I spread some just PVA. This is basic PVA, spread it out on the bottom. Once you've put the sand on it, sometimes you find things that you've missed. This is sand that I've pre-dried, I have sitting around for projects like this. I did a couple of shovelfuls of it originally, and so I haven't gone through that yet in the years that I've been doing it. Most of the time I'm working with 28mm bases, so you get an awful lot with a shovelful of sand. Same thing for both stands, poured the sand around, fixed it up with extra glue in the places where I could still see paint, and sprinkled it on till I was happy with the amount of sand that was and that it filled in all the things. I don't want to just bang on here, you can see what's going on. Oh, that was touching up some of the, once I'd done the sand there was some of the bits that had got glue and gunk on them, so I sprayed the pressure pack colour into the lid of the can so that I could dab it on with a sponge. Again, it took a bit for some things to dry, so over the days when the sand dried and I ended up with some gaps where I could still see some of the paint, so I had to go through and put a little bit more PVA on and stick some more sand on. I tidied up the base with some black paint around the edge to just make it nice, and I can't remember whether I've painted the poles here or not. I might have already done that step where I masked up the poles and painted them brown and painted a brown on the stick above to marry them in, because the one up the top's timber and the one down the bottom's metal. This was putting some pads on the bottom of the lamp so that it stands on the pads and doesn't wreck the cord, and I glued a bit of black cardboard over the bottom where the cord comes through, just to make it a bit more secret and to stop it catching on things. So here's the glamour shots of it all finished. I used mine as bedside lamp and I really like it. I gave the other one away and I'm not sure what Jeff's doing with his. And I had already pre-checked the LEDs for them, and you can run them for hours and they don't get hot, so it's all safe and nothing melts down and causes an issue. I hope you've really enjoyed watching it. This is probably, I think, the last helmet on poles video I've done. I've done every size possible now, and I hope you really enjoyed watching it. Have a great day. Bye.